The rain had not stopped all morning, a gray curtain that blurred the view of the city outside the old family house. Elena sat at the edge of her bed, clutching the silk dress that had been fitted for her sister. The gown smelled faintly of roses and expensive perfume, nothing like her own simple lavender soap. Her reflection in the mirror showed a woman she barely recognized, lips painted a color too bold for her, eyes wide with a fear she tried to hide. This was not her wedding day. It was Vivian's. And yet, somehow, it had become hers. Vivian's note still lay on the nightstand, scrawled in rushed handwriting. "I can't do it. Don't look for me. Tell them anything you like." The words had torn a hole through the air in the house. Their mother had cried until her face turned pale, whispering about ruined alliances, shame, and debts that could never be repaid. Their father had paced the length of the hall, his voice sharp as he repeated that the Hale fortune was their only chance to save what little remained of their crumbling estate. When his eyes finally landed on Elena, there was no plea in them, only command. "You'll go in her place," he said. Her heart had twisted, but she had not argued. All her life, Elena had been the quiet one, the girl who sacrificed, who swallowed dreams so her sister could shine. Vivian was meant for grand things. Elena was meant to endure. And so, with trembling hands, she allowed the maids to prepare her, while the storm outside echoed the storm inside her chest. They told her Damien Hale, the groom, was simple, reclusive, a man who avoided society, too shy for parties, too awkward to hold conversation. Rumor said he inherited millions, yet preferred books to people, silence to celebration. He would not notice the switch. He would not know the bride at his side was not the one promised. At least, that was what everyone assured her. Still, as the carriage rolled toward the church, Elena pressed her fingers together until her knuckles turned white. She felt the weight of the lie pressing on her lungs. The church loomed dark against the wet sky, candlelight glowing faintly through stained glass. Guests filled the pews, whispering about the Hale fortune, their eyes darting toward the veiled bride who walked slowly down the aisle. Elena could hear the pounding of her heart louder than the organ music. Each step carried her deeper into a role she had not chosen. She forced her face to remain calm, her lips curved into a faint smile, though inside she wanted to scream. At the altar, she finally saw him. Damien Hale stood tall, dressed in a black suit that fit him like it had been tailored from shadows. His hair was dark, neatly combed, his posture relaxed yet commanding. There was nothing awkward about him. His gaze, sharp and steady, lifted to meet hers. For a moment, the world fell silent. His eyes held hers with such piercing intensity that her breath caught. She felt as though he could see past the veil, past the painted face, straight into the frightened truth she carried. Elena lowered her gaze quickly, praying he had not noticed. The ceremony blurred around her. The vows spoken with a voice that shook only once. The ring slipped onto her trembling finger, the pronouncement that bound her to a stranger. Applause echoed faintly in her ears, but she could not feel her own hands. As they walked together out of the church, his arm brushed against hers. The touch was steady, warm, yet there was a weight in it, as if he had chosen it with care. Elena dared a glance at him. Damien's expression was unreadable, but his lips curved faintly, not in joy but in something quieter, something secret. And in that instant, Elena knew the rumors had lied. Damien Hale was not simple. He was not harmless. And she had just stepped into a life far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. The carriage rattled over the wet stones as Elena sat beside the man she had just married. The sound of hooves and wheels filled the silence, but she felt the weight of his presence more than anything. Damien did not look at her, yet she sensed his awareness, sharp and unyielding, as if every nervous breath she took was being measured and filed away inside his mind. Her veil lay forgotten in her lap, her hands clenched tightly together to stop them from shaking. The man at her side was not the quiet recluse she had been told about. He was something else, something far more dangerous, and the thought made her heart pound against her ribs. When the carriage reached the Hale estate, her breath caught. The mansion rose from the mist like a shadow-given form, tall and brooding, its many windows glowing faintly with candlelight. The gates creaked open as if they too knew they were guarding secrets. Elena hesitated before stepping out, her slipper sinking slightly into the gravel, but Damien's hand was there, steady and firm, guiding her forward. His touch was not cold, not cruel, but it carried an unspoken command that told her resistance would be useless. She forced her lips into a small smile, though inside her fear curled tighter. The servants lined the grand hall, bowing low as the new mistress entered. None dared meet her eyes. Their faces were blank, their movements rehearsed, as though they lived under an invisible rule that kept them silent. The silence was heavy, almost suffocating, broken only by the echo of her heels against the marble floor. Damien's voice finally cut through, low and smooth, when he dismissed them with a single word. They vanished like ghosts, leaving the hall vast and empty. He led her upstairs, past portraits of stern ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow her, and stopped before a set of double doors carved with intricate designs. When he pushed them open, the bedroom revealed itself in a blaze of firelight. The walls were lined with shelves filled not with novels or poetry, but with thick leather volumes stamped with strange symbols and numbers. A desk stood near the window, papers neatly stacked, maps pinned with small metal pins that glimmered in the fire's glow. It was not the room of a man uninterested in the world. It was the lair of a mind that worked endlessly in silence. Elena turned slowly, her heart in her throat, as Damien closed the doors behind them. The faint sound of the lock sliding into place echoed louder than thunder in her ears. He did not move toward her at once, only studied her with eyes that missed nothing. She tried to keep her voice steady when she finally spoke, congratulating him on the wedding, thanking him for his kindness, anything to fill the silence. But the words felt thin, weak, and his faint smile told her he could hear the lie beneath them. When he finally spoke, his tone was calm, almost gentle, but the words sent shivers through her. He asked her why she was trembling. He asked her if she thought he was blind. He asked her if she truly believed he did not know who she was. Her breath caught, and for a moment she could not answer. She could only stare, wide-eyed, as the realization sank deep into her bones. From the very first moment, from the aisle itself, Damien had known she was not Vivian. He had chosen silence, not ignorance. As he stepped closer, the firelight caught the edge of his eyes, and in them Elena saw something she could not yet name. Something brilliant, consuming, and dangerous. She had been sent here to protect her family's honor, to play the role of a substitute bride. But now she understood the truth. She had walked willingly into the hands of a man who was far more powerful than her family had ever warned her about. And in that room, with the flames crackling and his gaze fixed upon her, Elena realized her life was no longer her own. The fire had burned low by the time Elena realized she had not spoken a word in minutes. Damien stood near the window, his silhouette outlined by the storm beyond the glass. He had not pressed her further about the truth, nor had he reassured her. Instead, he allowed the silence to stretch, a silence that carried more weight than any accusation. When he finally turned, his expression was calm, yet his eyes glowed with a knowledge that unsettled her. He moved through the room with the ease of someone who belonged everywhere he walked, and his hand brushed across the desk. Papers shifted under his fingers, revealing diagrams too complex for her to understand. Curved lines, coded symbols, and calculations scrawled with flawless precision. She leaned closer, trying to read, but he covered them with one deliberate movement. His voice, low and even, cut through the quiet as he asked her why she was curious about things that did not concern her. She stumbled for words, claiming she only wished to understand her new life. He smiled faintly, as though amused, but the amusement was edged with warning. That night he did not touch her the way she had feared, nor the way she had expected. Instead, he spoke to her with questions that pierced her defenses. He asked about her childhood, about the books she liked, about why she stayed when her sister fled. His words circled her like a predator measuring prey, yet his tone carried an interest that unsettled her heart. For every answer she gave, he revealed nothing of himself, only watched her closely, as if cataloging each response for some unseen purpose. When she finally closed her eyes, exhausted, she thought she had escaped his scrutiny. But in the early hours, she woke to find him seated at the desk again, pages scattered around him, the firelight flickering against his face. His expression was sharp, focused, his pen scratching. GE symbols she did not understand. She thought she saw blueprints of machines, strange maps marked with red threads connecting points across the world, and numbers that seemed to form patterns only he could see. She realized then that the man she had married was not merely wealthy. He was building something in the shadows, something powerful, something that required a mind sharper than any she had ever known. The next morning the servants avoided her eyes. When she asked for breakfast in her chamber, the tray arrived with trembling hands and a warning glance, as though they feared even speaking too loud near her. She wandered the hall alone, trailing her fingers along the cold stone, until she came to a door at the far end of the corridor. The wood was black, the lock heavy, the handle gleaming as though it had been polished often. Something inside called to her. She pressed her ear against the door and thought she heard a faint mechanical hum. When she touched the handle, a voice broke the silence. Damien stood behind her, his presence so sudden she gasped. He did not raise his voice. He simply asked if she intended to break the first promise of their marriage so soon. Her heart leapt into her throat, for she had never promised him anything, yet he spoke as though their vows had included rules she had not been told. His hand brushed hers lightly, taking the handle and closing it firmly. The touch was not violent, but it carried an unmistakable authority. He leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear, and whispered that some doors in this house must never be opened, not even by her. That night, lying awake in the vast bed, Elena stared at the ceiling, her pulse still racing. The whispers of the servants, the diagrams on his desk, the forbidden hum behind the locked door, all of it pressed into her mind until fear and fascination tangled together. She had come into this marriage believing she was protecting her family's honor by marrying a man too timid to notice. Instead, she found herself beside a husband who was watching her every move, who knew more than he revealed, and who guarded secrets that might cost her far more than her freedom. The morning light seeped through tall windows, but inside the Hale mansion, the air felt colder than the storm outside. Elena moved quietly through the corridors, her slippers making no sound on the polished floor. She had barely slept, her mind haunted by the locked door and Damien's warning. Every step felt like trespass, as though the house itself watched her. The servants were already at work, their movements quick, their gazes lowered. When she entered the dining hall, they froze for a moment before bowing. She caught fragments of whispers that ceased the moment she approached, as if the very mention of her husband's name demanded silence. Damien sat at the head of the long table, already dressed, already waiting. His breakfast was untouched, a book lying open beside his plate. Elena sat across from him, her hands clasped in her lap. He lifted his eyes slowly, studying her face as though he knew she had been wandering in the night. His voice was calm when he asked her if she was comfortable. She answered softly that she was. The faintest shadow of a smile touched his lips, but it was not the smile of a man reassured. It was the smile of a man who already knew the truth and enjoyed hearing the lie. When he rose to leave, he brushed her shoulder lightly with his hand and told her the house was hers to explore, except for the locked wing. Then he was gone, disappearing down the hall with the soundless grace of someone who carried secrets in his very breath. Elena decided to test the silence of the mansion. She drifted through corridors lined with portraits whose painted eyes followed her with uncanny familiarity. In the library, she found books not of poetry or love, but dense tomes of physics, cryptography, and histories filled with annotations in Damien's precise handwriting. Margins were crowded with equations and symbols that looked more like codes than notes. A slip of paper fell from one book, covered in strange markings that resembled both maps and puzzles. She folded it quickly into her palm, her pulse racing, and hid it in the folds of her dress. Later that day, she overheard two maids whispering behind the kitchen door. One warned the other never to go near the east wing after nightfall, not unless they wished to disappear like the last footman who dared to enter. The other shushed her sharply, reminding her that walls had ears in this house. When Elena stepped into view, they bowed low, their faces drained of color, and left the room without finishing their task. That night, the unease thickened. As she walked toward her chamber, she thought she heard footsteps following her, yet when she turned, the corridor was empty. Shadows seemed longer, darker, stretching toward her with fingers of dread. Passing the locked door again, she felt the hum stronger now, a vibration that traveled into her bones. She pressed her hand against the wood, and for a heartbeat she thought she heard a faint ticking, like the gears of a clock hidden deep within. Her breath quickened. She turned to leave, but Damien was already there, leaning against the wall, watching her. His presence was so sudden she gasped, nearly stumbling backward. He stepped closer, his eyes burning with unspoken challenge. He asked if curiosity was stronger than trust. His voice was calm, but the silence that followed carried the weight of a storm. She whispered that she was only lost, but his gaze lingered, piercing, making her feel as though he could strip every truth from her with a glance. Without another word, he brushed past her, unlocked the door with a key that glimmered briefly in his hand, and stepped inside. The door closed again with a sound that echoed in her chest. She was left alone in the hall, trembling, her heart torn between terror and a growing hunger to know what secrets her husband kept hidden. For the first time, she understood that her new life was not simply a marriage arranged by her family. It was a descent into a labyrinth, and the man guiding her deeper was not simple at all. He was brilliant, calculating, and perhaps far more dangerous than she could endure. The rain had cleared by morning, but the air inside the mansion still felt heavy, as if the storm had taken root in its walls. Elena sat by the tall windows, her hands folded in her lap, watching the garden beyond. Damien had not returned to their chamber the night before. She had heard the lock on the forbidden door close, and then silence, long silence that stretched into dawn. Her thoughts circled endlessly, trying to decide whether he trusted her enough to leave her alone or whether he simply knew she had nowhere else to go. When he appeared in the doorway, the suddenness of it made her breath catch. He was dressed in black again, every line of his body controlled, his expression unreadable. Yet his eyes lingered on her longer than usual, as though searching her face for something she did not know she possessed. Without a word, he crossed the room and placed a folded cloth on the table beside her. Inside lay a small mechanical device no bigger than her palm. Its gears shimmered like silver, its shape delicate yet impossible to understand. He told her to hold it. She obeyed, the weight colder than she expected. When her fingers pressed against a small notch, the gears clicked to life, spinning with a rhythm too precise to be accidental. She looked up at him in shock. He only watched her, his mouth curved faintly, and said it was a fragment of something greater, something the world was not ready to see. His tone carried pride but also the shadow of pain, as if his genius had built more enemies than allies. For the first time since their wedding, Elena saw something human in him. He was not only a man of wealth and secrets, but someone who carried the burden of being far beyond what others could understand. She whispered a question, asking if this was why people feared him. His silence was answer enough. That night, as the storm gathered again, she found him seated on the floor of the library, papers spread around him, his jacket discarded. The fire lit the scars that crossed his shoulder and back, faint marks of a life that had not been as untouchable as the world believed. She approached slowly, her hand trembling before it rested lightly on his arm. He did not pull away. Instead, he told her a story in fragments, of betrayal by those closest to him, of inventions stolen, of nights spent fighting enemies that wore friendly smiles. His voice did not rise, but the weight of it pressed into her chest, leaving her breathless. The distance between them began to blur. She saw the man behind the mask, the brilliance chained with wounds that had never healed. Yet even as her heart pulled toward him, her mind whispered warnings. This was a man who could build wonders or weapons, who could love with the same intensity he destroyed. When she finally met his gaze, it was steady, unflinching, filled with an intensity that frightened her and drew her closer all at once. He told her he did not need her lies, nor her obedience. He needed her to choose whether she would walk beside him willingly, knowing exactly what he was. His words hung in the air like a vow, and Elena realized that the true danger was no longer the locked doors or hidden blueprints. The true danger was the way her heart was beginning to answer him. The night was too quiet, the kind of quiet that made Elena's pulse race in her throat. Damien had left the mansion hours earlier, summoned to some urgent matter he refused to explain. The servants moved in hushed patterns, as if his absence demanded reverence, and then the house sank into silence. Alone in her chamber, Elena stared at the key she had stolen from his desk drawer. It was small, black, unremarkable, but it carried the weight of everything he had forbidden her to know. Her breath trembled as she rose, the floor cold beneath her feet. The corridor stretched long and shadowed, the torches casting uneven light that seemed to lean away from the east wing. Her heart pounded as she reached the black door. The hum behind it was louder now, steady like the pulse of a machine alive in the dark. She pressed the key into the lock and turned. The click echoed through the hall, final and dangerous, and the door swung open. Inside, the air smelled of metal and smoke, laced with something sharp that burned her throat. The chamber was vast, filled with machines she could not name. Copper wires coiled across the floor, connecting to strange devices that glowed faintly with blue light. Papers lay pinned across the walls, covered with codes and maps dotted with red ink. In the center stood a table lined with blueprints. Elena stepped closer, her hands trembling as her eyes scanned the sketches. They were not simple designs. They were weapons, intricate machines capable of destruction, their purpose undeniable. Her breath caught when she saw her own name scribbled in the corner of one page. At first she thought it was a mistake, but no, it was her full name, written in Damien's hand, circled in dark ink. Beneath it, words she could barely read: trust variable, loyalty tested, potential equal. The room spun around her. She realized she was not only his wife, she was part of some calculation, some experiment woven into his secrets. A sound behind her snapped her head up. Footsteps. Heavy, steady, deliberate. She turned, and there he was, standing in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He had returned without a sound, his gaze fixed on the blueprint she still held in her hand. For a moment he said nothing, only walked toward her slowly, like a predator closing in. She tried to speak, to explain, but her voice faltered. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, far too calm. He asked her what she had seen. She whispered the truth. Everything. His lips curved faintly, not in anger, but in something more chilling. He told her that no one who entered this room left unchanged. His hand closed over hers, steady, firm, guiding the blueprint back onto the table. Then his eyes locked on hers, sharp and unblinking. He told her he had always known she would defy him. He told her he had left the key where she would find it. He told her this was the moment he had been waiting for. The revelation froze her blood. She thought she had crossed a line, but in truth, she had walked exactly where he wanted her. As the machines around them hummed louder, as if waking to his command, Elena realized she was no longer a guest in her husband's world. She was inside it now, bound by secrets she could never escape. And Damien, with that faint, dangerous smile, made it clear that from this night forward, her life was no longer hers alone. The hum of the machines faded into silence when Damien pulled the main lever down, his movements slow and deliberate. The blue glow dimmed, leaving only the firelight from the far corner to paint shadows across his face. Elena stood frozen in the center of the chamber, her breath shallow, the blueprint still heavy in her mind. He circled her once, not touching, not speaking, his gaze sharp enough to cut through her defenses. When he finally stopped in front of her, the quiet stretched so long it felt like the world itself had paused. He asked her why she stayed when she could have run. His voice was low, almost gentle, but his eyes held something merciless. She tried to answer, but the words tangled on her tongue. She whispered of duty, of her family's honor, of promises she had never chosen. He tilted his head, studying her as though she were an equation waiting to be solved. Then, with a faint smile, he told her she was lying again. Her heart slammed against her ribs as he stepped closer, close enough that the heat of him wrapped around her like fire. He said he wanted the truth, not the performance she had been forced to play. She stammered, insisting she was Vivian, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. His smile deepened, and then he spoke her real name. Elena. The sound of it on his lips sent a shiver down her spine. He had known all along. Her knees weakened as the reality crashed into her. Every moment since the aisle, every glance, every question, he had been aware. He had not been deceived for even a second. She had been living inside his game, a pawn on a board he had designed. She demanded to know why he let it continue, why he had bound her to him in silence. His answer chilled her as much as it shook her heart. He said he did not want Vivian. He wanted her. Elena's breath caught. He told her that Vivian's beauty was easy, her charm predictable, her betrayal inevitable. But Elena, quiet, overlooked, loyal Elena, had something rarer, a strength she did not even know she carried. He confessed he had orchestrated everything, even Vivian's disappearance, because he wanted the one who would not abandon him when the world turned hostile. His words were not a plea. They were a declaration, fierce and unyielding. She trembled between fury and something more dangerous, something that pulled at her chest despite her fear. She told him he was mad, that he had stolen her choices, trapped her in lies. His response was simple, and it cut deep. He said he had given her the truth tonight because he wanted her to decide whether she would stand beside him willingly or spend her life running from him. His hand brushed her cheek, not rough but commanding, and for a heartbeat she forgot her anger, lost in the fire of his gaze. The machines hummed again as he turned away, leaving her shaken in the middle of the chamber. She realized this was no ordinary marriage, no arrangement bound by duty. She was tied to a man who had chosen her above all else, a man whose genius was as dangerous as his love. The air felt heavy with both threat and promise, and Elena knew the next choice she made could either destroy her or bind her forever to the one man she both feared and could not resist. The night had barely settled when the first sign of danger came. Elena was in her chamber, the storm clouds rolling outside the window, when she noticed the flicker of movement in the garden below. At first she thought it was one of the servants, but the figure moved too quickly, too deliberately, hugging the shadows as if trying not to be seen. Her breath caught as a second figure appeared, then a third, all dressed in dark coats, their steps silent as they slipped toward the east wing of the mansion. She rushed to find Damien, her heart pounding, but the hall was empty. The servants were nowhere to be seen, as if they had vanished into the walls. Panic surged in her chest until a hand caught her wrist from the darkness. She nearly screamed before Damien's voice, low and sharp, silenced her. He pulled her into an alcove, his eyes glittering in the dim light. He whispered that she must not speak, not move, not draw attention, for the house was no longer safe. From their hidden place, she watched as intruders forced the side doors open. Their boots echoed faintly, their faces hidden by masks, their weapons glinting in the faint glow of the lanterns. They moved with practiced precision, as if they knew the layout of the mansion already. One of them muttered Vivian's name, saying she was their key, that her disappearance had only delayed what was inevitable. Elena froze. They believed she was Vivian. They were here for her. Damien's grip tightened on her hand, steady but unyielding. He leaned close, whispering that he would not let them touch her. His calmness in the face of danger unsettled her as much as it comforted her. Then he stepped forward, leaving her in the shadows, his figure dissolving into the hall like a shadow himself. What happened next was swift, too swift for her to understand fully. She heard the clash of steel, the crack of gunfire muffled by the mansion's thick walls, the sharp cries of men who had underestimated their prey. When she finally dared to step out, she saw two intruders sprawled on the marble floor, their weapons scattered, their faces pale. Damien stood over them, untouched, his breath steady, his eyes cold and bright. The remaining men fled into the storm, leaving only silence behind. Elena trembled as he turned to her. His hands were stained, his shirt torn, but his gaze locked on her with a fierce intensity. He told her that this was the price of brilliance, that the world would never stop hunting him, and now her as well. She whispered that she had not asked for this life, that she was not the woman they sought. He silenced her with a truth she could not escape. Whether she was Vivian or Elena, they would come again, and they would come for her. That night, as thunder rolled and the mansion felt more like a fortress than a home, Damien sat beside her and spoke with rare honesty. He told her of enemies who wanted his inventions, of men who would pay any price for the designs locked in his mind. He confessed that marrying her had been more than desire. It had been strategy, a way to bind someone he could trust into his world. She wanted to hate him for it, but when his hand brushed hers, she felt the tremor of something deeper than calculation. For the first time, she saw not only his danger but his devotion. He would kill for her, die for her, and in that revelation lay both terror and temptation. She lay awake long after he slept, staring into the dark, torn between the fear of the enemies at their door and the fear of the man who had vowed to protect her with every ounce of his brilliance and every shadow of his power. The storm had passed, but the house remained heavy with the echo of violence. Elena walked through the east wing, her eyes falling on the shattered glass, the bloodstains Damien had not bothered to hide. Servants whispered in corners but fell silent when she entered, their fear pressing down on her like a weight. The world outside was closing in, and inside these walls she was caught between love and danger. Damien found her in the library, her hands clenched around one of his notebooks. She had opened it in desperation, needing to understand the man she had married. What she found chilled her. Pages filled with calculations for machines that could topple empires, codes that reached into governments and corporations. She realized that in her hands lay the power to expose him, to stop him, to end the cycle of shadows that surrounded them both. When he entered, his steps silent as ever, she lifted her gaze to meet his. He did not look surprised to find her holding his secrets. He only asked in a quiet voice if she was ready to decide. Her throat tightened. He had given her no threats, no chains, but still she felt bound. She could betray him, give his secrets to the world, and perhaps buy her freedom. Or she could stand beside him, accept his brilliance and his darkness, and become part of something she did not fully understand. He walked closer, his eyes never leaving hers. He told her that he had lived too long in a world where people wanted his genius, but never his soul. He told her that he had chosen her not because she was obedient, but because she was different, strong in a way Vivian had never been. He said she was the only one who could stand in his world without breaking. His words struck deep, making her heart tremble with fear and longing. She whispered that she could not be part of a life built on lies and blood. His jaw tightened, but then his hand rose gently to her face, his thumb brushing her cheek as though she were the most fragile truth he had ever held. He asked her if she could walk away now, knowing what he had shown her, knowing how far he would go for her. The silence between them was more dangerous than the intruders, more powerful than the secrets written on the pages. She felt herself unraveling, every thread of doubt and desire tangled together until she could barely breathe. At last she spoke, her voice breaking. She told him that she could not betray him, but neither could she surrender blindly. If she was to stay, she would stay as his equal, not his pawn. For a long moment he said nothing. Then his lips curved into a faint smile, sharp and dangerous, but touched with something that felt like hope. He told her that was the answer he had been waiting for. He closed the notebook and placed it back on the shelf, then took her hand, pressing it against his chest. She felt the steady rhythm of his heart, strong and relentless, and knew he was offering her more than protection. He was offering her a place in his world, his empire of shadows and brilliance. That night, Elena lay awake with the knowledge that her choice had bound her forever. She had not exposed him, had not run. She had chosen to stay, even as fear whispered in her ear. And deep inside, beyond the fear, a dangerous truth stirred. She was beginning to love the very man who could destroy her. The dawn crept slowly over the Hale estate, washing the mansion in pale gold. Elena stood on the balcony, the cold air brushing her skin, her thoughts heavy and unsteady. She had chosen to stay, chosen to face Damien's brilliance and his shadows, but her heart carried questions that refused to sleep. She could no longer silence the truth pressing against her ribs. She needed to know why fate had pushed her into this marriage, why her sister had vanished so easily, why Damien's eyes had looked at her with recognition from the very first step down the aisle. When she turned, he was already there, as if he had been waiting for her to demand answers. He leaned against the doorframe, his dark suit immaculate, his gaze calm but unyielding. She asked him where Vivian had gone, her voice breaking under the weight of suspicion. For the first time, his mask slipped into something sharper. He did not hesitate. He told her Vivian had never run away. He had sent her away. The ground seemed to tilt beneath Elena. He explained with chilling precision. Vivian had been offered money, freedom, escape from the burden of an unwanted marriage. She had taken it without hesitation, vanishing into the world with his assistance. He had never intended to marry Vivian. His choice had always been Elena. Her breath came in short gasps as he stepped closer, every word pulling her deeper into a truth she had not dared to imagine. He told her he had studied her family for years, weighed every strength and weakness, and found in her the one thing he had sought all his life: loyalty that did not crumble, strength born of sacrifice, a heart that could see beyond power and wealth. Vivian had been a distraction, but Elena had been the answer. He had orchestrated the switch before she even knew there was a choice. Her hands shook with fury and betrayal. She demanded to know if she was only a piece in his calculation, a pawn moved on his board of genius. His eyes softened then, and he told her she was the only part he had not calculated. He had chosen her because she was the one variable that made him uncertain, the one person who could break through the fortress of his mind and make him human again. Tears burned in her eyes as she struggled between anger and a pull far stronger than reason. He admitted he had manipulated, deceived, built walls of lies, but he had never lied about what he felt for her. He told her he would burn his empire, abandon his moms, Chinese, destroy every weapon he had built if she asked it. His voice shook for the first time, raw and unguarded, as he whispered that he only wanted her to stand beside him. The choice struck her like lightning. She could turn away and expose him, watch the world consume his genius and end the shadowed empire he had built. Or she could stay, not as his pawn, but as his equal, binding herself to a man as dangerous as he was devoted. The silence stretched, heavy as the storm that had haunted their nights, until at last she stepped closer and laid her hand on his chest. His heart beat strong beneath her palm, steady and real. She whispered that she would not forgive his deception easily, but she would not leave him. Damien's eyes closed as if the weight of the world had lifted. When he opened them, there was no mask, no calculation, only a fierce devotion that terrified her as much as it warmed her. He pulled her into his arms, not with force, but with a desperate need that matched her own. The world beyond their walls would remain dangerous, filled with enemies waiting to strike, but inside that moment she knew she had chosen her path. She had taken her sister's place, believing she was marrying a simple man, harmless and unremarkable. Instead, she had found a dangerous genius who could bend the world to his will. And now, she was no longer afraid. She was part of him, bound not by deception, but by a truth that neither could deny. As the morning sun rose higher, painting the mansion in light, Elena realized that the greatest secret of all was not hidden in Damien's machines or his blueprints. It was in the way his arms tightened around her, in the vow unspoken on his lips. She had not been trapped, she had been chosen, and now she chose him too,